Today's episode of the GoldCast is sponsored by how batshit crazy this free agency has been. My God, we weren't even planning on goldcasting tonight, but this news of Russell Westbrook is so crazy that Candlestick Will sent us a text that, hey, we got to go on. We've got to talk about everything that's happened in this offseason. It's just so insane. But before we do that, Raymond, why don't you let them know where can they find us?
You can like us on Facebook.com/The GoldCast, and you can also follow us on iTunes, Instagram, and Stitcher, all under the same moniker of The GoldCast, as well as Twitter at @the_GoldCast. Like, subscribe, and comment because we love to hear from you. And we have a new host to join us in all of those comments and when we go off and share some of the feedback that we get from you guys. So it'll be a new take on that segment of the show.
Awesome. And Raymond, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ray Solis and on Instagram at Ray Solis1.
Candlestick Will, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at, guess what, Candlestick Will.
Boom. And you can find me on Instagram at Rudy Solis3 and on Twitter at Rudy Solis3RD. All right. This is just a straight NBA free agency insanity podcast. We talked about it a little bit at the end of the last episode that I recorded on Tuesday, my solo episode, but it's just so crazy. We had to get on and talk about it again. This is just an unprecedented era for the NBA, and it's pretty crazy. And of course, it affects the Warriors as well. So sit back, relax. Your professors of fanalism are here. Class is in session. Let's go.
San Francisco, are you ready? This is the GoldCast.
Boom! Welcome to another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis the First, baby.
And our esteemed co-host. Yes! Boom! In the building. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start, and then I'm going to pass it off. I know, Candlestick Will, I know you're chomping at the bit to get out there, so I'm going to let you loose here in a second. I'm just sitting here in my car on my way to go grocery shopping, and then Bleacher Report sends out the big message that Russell Westbrook has been reunited with James Harden in Houston. He is on the Houston Rockets once again, just another mind-blowing player being traded or leaving or going to another team. This NBA free agency is unprecedented. I have never seen anything like this ever. It is insane. So, Candlestick Will, why don't you start us off, because you've been going crazy on this on Twitter all about this. Why don't you break this down for the people?
It's holy shitballs is be my first reaction. It's just further proof that the NBA is just the best league in the whole wide world for what people tend to love about Twitter in general and sports talk in general, because this doesn't happen in the NFL. This doesn't happen in Major League Baseball. I don't think it happens in hockey. I don't see any other sport, even in soccer, it's just like all the best teams just buy their guys. Like these kind of trades and all these things that are happening all the time, every offseason. And now it's just getting, more extreme this year. But I mean, these kind of trades are just mind blowing to think that just when you think the league's been shifted, it gets shifted 3 more times. LeBron gets Anthony Davis, and it's like, wow, that actually did really happen. Okay, now the Lakers are going to be formidable. Then the Clippers get what the Clippers get, and Brooklyn gets what Brooklyn gets, and the Celtics look dead, and then they get Kemba Walker, and then the Sixers add Al Horford, and it's like, so all these teams are just moving around pieces, and you're like, oh my God. Then the Warriors get D'Angelo Russell, and it's like, well, we lost Durant, but we add an All-Star. Like, this just doesn't happen. Like, if a baseball team loses an All-Star, they have to hope that some of their AAA guys can step in. Like, this kind of pace is just insane to me. So for Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook to suddenly swap, it's just like, it's almost like we knew this was going to happen, but how the hell did it happen? At the same time.
It is so crazy. Raymond, what are your thoughts?
I thought it was over with. I was like, all right, we're just going to kind of get back to normal now. We'll have, the leftovers move around a bit, role players, bench players. And sure enough, I think this kind of adds a little bit of credibility to the reported turmoil between James Harden and Chris Paul earlier in the free agency, or earlier in the offseason, I should say. I think the playoffs were just ending or towards the tail end. I can't recall when exactly it happened, but I remember Chris Paul saying, "Oh, that's news to me." But no player's ever going to say, "Yeah, that's 100% true. I hate his guts." No one's ever going to come out and say that. So it's hard to know which side is actually telling the truth. I usually think it falls somewhere in the middle, where there's some truth to the journalist, perhaps dramatizing, of course, because that's their job, and then of course some truth that perhaps the players did have some sort of disagreement or tiff, what have you. But I think to me, I feel like Houston takes a step back with this trade.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because now you have two ISO ball dominant players who are known for sometimes doing nothing on defense. So what do you think, Candlestick Will? What do you Raymond? You say this puts them a step back. Candlestick, what do you think?
Well, they're better than they were with Chris Paul coming into the season. I mean, they've got a better player in Westbrook. I think it's, ratcheted up to 11 for the drama potential between Harden and Westbrook. Everything I've read over the years is that they were always cool. Like all this drama that we've heard, first hand, second hand, 12th hand about Westbrook and Durant, when Harden left because he wanted to have a, more prominent role somewhere else and ended up getting traded to Houston, it didn't seem like there was any animosity between Harden and Russ. So it sounds like Harden was pushing for this trade, and so they are friends. So the drama is going to happen on the court because they're two alpha males that need the ball and want the ball. And, there's already jokes on Twitter about, them arguing over who gets to make the last pass to get the triple double first and, all that kind of stuff. And, it's like they're going to be all drama on the court, but they're not going to have the drama off the court probably that Harden and CP3 had until they start losing in big games. If and when they lose in the playoffs, then it's going to look probably just as bad as it did for Houston this year. But Westbrook's a better player right now than Chris Paul is. Chris Paul is just not the same player he used to be, and Westbrook is still in his prime. So they'll be better just simply because Westbrook's better than Chris Paul, but there still could be some chemistry issues on the court as far as who's the point guard, who's the leader, who's the main guy. Can Westbrook let Harden keep this being his team, or is Westbrook going to try to go full Westbrook when once the game starts?
And he's historically had a very, very difficult time not going full Westbrook. Raymond, explain to the people, why do you think this makes them worse?
Well, they're volume shooters, so they have to shoot a ridiculous amount. They have to take a ridiculous amount of shots to get the score results that they typically get. Westbrook is a prolific scorer, and if we're comparing him to Chris Paul, Chris Paul's never topped 22 points in a season in his entire career, whereas Westbrook has been a scoring leader. He's been an MVP, so he's a multi-all-star. But the real big issue to me that stands out is the turnover ratio. Both of these players are turnover machines. In fact, Harden has led the league in turnovers the last 5 out of 7 years, and Westbrook has been a top 10 turnover machine for the last 10 years. He's been in the top 5. He's led the league 3 times. He's been in second place in that category 2 of those 10 years. He's been in third place 2 of those 10 years. He's been in fourth place 1 of those years. He's been in fifth place 1 of those years. So both these guys have a well documented and a very just as consistent as they are scoring, they are equally consistent at turning the ball over. So I'm very curious how that's going to play off, because even when Harden wasn't the ball distributor and that task was given to Chris Paul, he still turned over the ball. So regardless of who the point guard is, Harden seems to get rid of the ball lose the ball, no matter what. But if I'm being fair, they've gotten deep into the playoffs, multiple years in a row. With the OKC is obviously an exception. They can't get past the first round with Russell, so maybe they get to that same hump, or perhaps challenge it, or maybe even get past it with Russell Westbrook. We don't know. We're going to have to find out. But I just think that kind of statistic with these two alpha males, these two personalities, to me, it seems like a recipe for disaster.
I have no idea. I have no idea how this is going to work. I was also really hesitant about Chris Paul, mainly from a chemistry side. What does concern me is offensively, exactly what you both have touched on, is offensively, how do these two guys get along on the court? And yeah, who's going to have the ball in the final 5 seconds when someone needs to take a shot to win the game? Because Westbrook likes to be there, but his scoring ability is gone down, and he's definitely not at the level he once was. And it's got to go to Harden, but historically, Westbrook hasn't had to really share the team in terms of offense in a long time, and he let Paul George take the reins, more last year. But I'm not entirely sure that he's ready for a full-on transition to completely let go of the reins and let Harden be the leader. Candlestick Will, what do you think?
I mean, I would assume that because of these two guys now being there, that the Houston Rockets will still look to try to move other guys. Like, I'm not sure if PJ Tucker and Capella and Eric Gordon will still be on the team. They might try to swap Eric Gordon for a point guard so that, or just try to bring someone in that can defend, better than Eric Gordon can, and just try to get some kind of balance to what they have. Then again, they might choose to keep Gordon and know that because Westbrook is not a great three-point shooter, and Harden, even though he makes a lot of threes, he has to take a ton of threes to get the numbers that someone like Steph or Clay does, that, maybe you have to keep Eric Gordon so you have another scorer on the floor. There's going to be a lot of imbalance on the Rockets, but, the West specifically, and even some teams in the East, but they're just so top-heavy across the board now that I think it's one of those things where these teams in general are looking like, look, if we just add elite talent, we'll fill out the team however. And so what's going to happen is a lot of these teams are going to be missing depth come playoff time. And so some guys that probably have no business being on the floor are going to be asked to play key minutes for not just the Warriors or the Rockets, but for everybody. The Lakers and the Clippers might look deep on paper, but, a couple injuries or a couple other trades or whatever, and, all these teams could look pretty lean come playoff time. So will there be a big buyout market? Will there be more trades? I'm sure there'll be other big trades, to come, whether it's guys like Steven Adams or guys on the Rockets or whoever. I know Miami wants to try to get Chris Paul. So will other teams besides Miami want Chris Paul? Will anyone else want Chris Paul? So as those trades happen, what dominoes will happen there? For someone like Steven Adams, will he go to a playoff team, or will he go to someone that's trying to become a playoff team? That kind of thing. And, who else has the cap space to bring in pieces? And will those teams want, some of these other guys? Someone like Roberson, who's a tremendous defender, but he's been injured for the last couple of years. Does a playoff team end up going after him because of his defense? Maybe he goes to to Houston in a separate trade to get someone who can defend, to help out Westbrook and Harden. So I think there's a lot of things that haven't happened yet that'll still fall. Will Bradley Beal end up getting traded? Will some of these other guys who have a year or two left, will they end up being the next dominoes to fall? And if someone's willing to take on John Wall's contract, does him and Beal go somewhere? Does Kevin Love get traded from Cleveland? So there's other guys that are, former All-Stars that could end up being on the move too.
Totally true. Now with that, Raymond, let me ask you, and then I want you, Candlestick Will, to answer this question too. Raymond, where, after all this movement, so much is shaken out, where do you see the Warriors landing in this? Literally, we're talking a brand new NBA. Where do the Warriors land right now in the NBA?
In terms of rank,
Yeah, in terms of rank on paper, where do you think they stand?
I mean, they're still a top 5 team, in my opinion. They've got one of the best defenders in the association in Draymond Green, and you've got the best 3-point shooter in the entire association in Steph Curry. So, and you have another one who's going to come back, arguably in March. So the best shooting backcourt is still there. It's still going to, make an appearance this upcoming season. It's just going to happen a lot later than it ever has before. But if I'm Houston, I think you've got to move one of those other role players now, because now you sorely need defense. You can't just run. I mean, D'Antoni's proven one thing, that he's the Don Nelson of his era. So even though their careers overlap, a lot, but he reminds me of Don Nelson, where he's all offense, no defense, and I get it. Basketball's 80% offense, 20% defense, but that 20% makes a difference between deep playoff runs and championships. So you've got to do something if you're Houston. So if I'm a Houston fan, I'm kind of torn. If I was a Houston fan, I'd be kind of happy, but also kind of like confused at the same time, because I'm like, you just got the same personality on your team who makes the same mistakes, but also can make some of the most tremendous plays, just like our other star players. So how do you balance these two personalities together, because they're very, very similar, and not necessarily in terms of how they play, but how their numbers shape up is very similar. They're volume shooters, so I don't know. But as far as the Warriors are concerned, I don't think this really moves the needle much for them, because I think that a lot of these movements don't really affect the Warriors too much. I would say the AD has more implications than the Russell Westbrook trade, but it's still kind of a wait and see, because there's still pieces, like Candlestick Will pointed out, there's still pieces that haven't moved yet. So we need to see how the rest of their depth is going to turn out, because they're not done. So I want to see what Chris Paul's movement does for them, and vice versa. How that shapes other teams, because there's still a bunch of moving parts that are going to shift before the end of this.
Candlestick Will, what do you think? Where do the Warriors land now with all this movement? Where do you have them in rank?
Oh, I had them in the top 3 or 4, to be honest, when the Kawhi Leonard, Paul George moves happened, because I figured the Clippers were now the clear favorites, that you could put the Warriors as high as 2 before today, because every other team, while they're all exciting on paper, don't necessarily have that much more depth than the Warriors do. And the Warriors are still just as top heavy as everybody else, because Steph and D'Angelo Russell are still very, very good as a duo, compared to all these other new duos that we've seen, like the teams like Utah and Portland that, everyone's kind of jumping on their bandwagons as like they're going to be the hot teams, and the Nuggets as well. It's like the Warriors thumped the Nuggets last year with Steph and Clay. They can do the same with Steph and Russell. So I don't know if the Warriors are any worse than the Rockets or the Jazz or the Blazers and those teams. The Rockets are better, but the Warriors have always beaten the Rockets. They've always beaten on Harden. Now Westbrook, for the most part, doesn't necessarily do great against the Warriors. Obviously, when he had Durant and Ibaka and those guys together in the 73 win season, that they nearly beat them, but the Warriors did come back in that series. So a lot of that had to do with the way Westbrook plays in the playoffs, and how by the fourth quarter he's completely tapped out, to the points that you guys were making before about how he's turnover prone and he's a volume shooter that doesn't necessarily make a lot of shots. So those things really hurt when you get into crunch time minutes against good defenses. The biggest thing for the Warriors, as far as where they rank on paper versus reality, is going to be their team defense, because Draymond is essentially by himself now with Clay out. So their defense is taking a huge hit with Durant.
You still have Looney, though. Looney's a very competent defender too.
Right, but at the same time, Cauley Stein can be a competent defender too against certain centers, and Looney's definitely held his own on switches against some elite talent. So they have some pieces that can be good, but without Iguodala, without Livingston, without Durant, they are losing a lot of what made them dangerous on defense, because of all the switching they could do. They really can't do switches anymore the way they used to. They can't just switch on whoever and be fine. They're going to have to do some more creative things defensively. They're going to have more help defense than just simply switching no matter who it is, because what made the Warriors so elite defensively was they had so many guys that could do so many different things. And now 3 of those guys are gone. So it's going to be difficult for them to play the same kind of defense they were playing. Now, that doesn't mean they can't still play competent defense, and Ron Adams staying is going to certainly help with that.
Yes, I saw that. That was great news. I was very happy about that.
But because of the hard cap, they're not going to necessarily be able to add much to what they have right now. So does that mean that they need to get more from McKinney? Does that mean they need to get some defense from Alec Burks, who's been more of an offensive guy his whole career? My hope for them, if you're looking at from a prism of trying to figure out how the Warriors can be the best they can be, would be someone like Eric Pascal becoming that mini Draymond, being a guy who they could just plug in and play quality minutes. I would actually look at, with the team they have, they really don't have a starting small forward. So I actually think that if Pascal shows that he can handle it, that he should start for them, because if you have a guy who,
he should start. He should get the starting position.
Yeah, that it should be, Steph and Russell with Pascal, Draymond, and then either Stein or Looney, whoever they decide to start. But because the other guys that they could choose from, I mean, they could choose someone like McKinney. They could play someone like Burks or Glenn Robinson III, or some of those guys. But Burks and Robinson are more offensive guys. They're better off the bench. Their skill set, they're better fits off the bench. So those 2 guys and Jordan Poole are guys that make more sense to come off the bench. Whereas Pascal is such a smart player and was in such a winning environment in college, and is just the reason he's compared to Draymond is because he just plays winning basketball. That I think him playing with Draymond and with Steph would actually end up making his value even more. And he would be a nice piece for any second unit, but Draymond was a nice piece for their second unit until David Lee got hurt. And then he stepped in the starting lineup and became a huge figure in their starting lineup. I think Pascal could be that again. If you end up starting someone like McKinney, I think you're going to lose a lot in that, unless McKinney takes a huge step up. But to not have any strong defender out there except Draymond, and your center, ends up making it where they're very vulnerable then against perimeter players that are good. And the West is now loaded with perimeter talent. So when you're facing Harden and Westbrook, if they're being guarded by Russell and Curry, you're in a lot of trouble. So I'm not suggesting someone like Pascal or even McKinney is the answer there, but you need somebody who can play defense. And so,
I'm with you in that. My hope is that Pascal develops quickly, and that he can that his growth can kind of accelerate under the tutelage of Draymond.
Well, and I think starting him is very similar to when they started Harrison Barnes, in that you limit what they have to be good at initially. Like, he would only have to be good and competent defensively for him to excel in that group, because Russell and Curry are going to handle most of the offensive load. Draymond is going to lead the defense, so he doesn't have to be, responsible to be the best defender on the floor. He would have to take some perimeter guys at times that he'd be overmatched against, but he'd be able to get help in that way from Draymond or Looney or whoever. And I think if you did start Pascal, I think you would also need to start Looney, because I think his ability to be versatile defensively would be that much more important. And someone like Cauley Stein could come in off the bench, play with Russell and play some pick and roll, and have, be able to create some mismatches that way. And I think that would make more sense most nights anyway, because then you'd have some better versatility defensively. And because Pascal can guard multiple positions, I think it would help, because Draymond prefers to be able to be more of a center fielder, and I think he'd be able to do that better if someone like Pascal could start. And he might not be able to. Rookies very rarely are able to just jump right in and start, but I think that would be the best case scenario for the Warriors. And I still think they could be as high as a two seed, even with Clay out. But it's certainly going to be difficult, because it's going to be night in, night out of just absolute 15-round knockout fights with some of these teams in the West.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of worries me a little bit is I'm hoping that Curry doesn't overexert himself by taking too much of the load and get himself injured, because he does have an injury history, and this is a scenario that could perhaps, play into that vulnerability. So I'm hoping that, that they kind of rein that part of him in just a little bit, because this is not a season where we have to, I mean, the goal is to win every game. So I get that. But at the same time, the players that we've got and the players that we're going to develop this year, I think Curry needs to allow some of that to develop so that he's not in a position where he is overexerting himself, because that's what leads to injuries, especially for someone like him.
So here's a question I have for you guys. Where does our offense come from? If let's say we had a starting lineup that has Draymond, Looney, and Pascal, are we really just going to depend on Steph and Russell to basically take the brunt of the offensive load? I mean, we have no KD, no Clay, and I get that we have Russell now, we have D'Lo, but he's not KD or Clay. So how do we offensively win these games, Candlestick? Well, where's the advantage to starting those three defenders and just having those two offensive weapons?
Well, I think one of the things you've seen from Curry over the years, whether it's getting guys like Clay and Durant going in a game, or whether it's trying to get lobs to Damian Jones early when he had to start, or whoever was starting, Steph is become pretty famous, I would say, for not looking for his shot initially and trying to get other guys involved in the first few minutes of a game. And I think that is going to be a huge part of what this team will be, is that he's going to get his points and he's going to score in all four quarters, and he'll be playing. He might not necessarily take 6 minutes off in the second quarter and 6 minutes off in the fourth like he has been the last 5 years. He might have to play a little bit more, or maybe even play a little bit less in the first quarter, let D'Angelo Russell take over at point guard and try and get some of the offensive load from guys like Poole, Burks, and Robinson. But I think that Curry's going to try and get Pascal easy shots. He's going to try and get McKinney easy shots, or whoever ends up starting at that small forward position. He's going to try to get Looney some easy looks and Cauley Stein some lobs and those kind of things, and try and get points from other places, so that if he suddenly has some plays in a row where he's getting 2 or 3 wide open threes, that's just a part of their offense, but it's not the only thing they're doing. Because I think that's the one thing we've seen in the last 5 years is when the Warriors tend to struggle, Curry's actually doing all the offense. He's trying to score on every possession. And when they're the most dangerous is when Curry's hit a couple shots and then he's looking for his teammates, and now the defense is scrambling because they're definitely afraid that Curry's going to get another shot off, and meanwhile he finds a wide open Clay or a wide open Durant or whoever it was. Now he doesn't have that luxury of having elite shooters around him outside of Russell, who's pretty damn good. And that's where I think guys like Poole and Robinson and Burks come in, is because the Warriors bench has been, famously thin offensively the last few years. And those three adds are all better offensively than defensively. So, Robinson's able to shoot from the way he shot in Indiana, where he was shooting 39%. And Poole clearly is shown he can be a volume shooter and come up big in moments in college, which is we're already seeing flashes of that in the summer league. And then Alec Burks has always been able to get his points when he's been on the floor, no matter where he's played in the NBA. So I think that's going to be a big part of it too, is those guys being able to do more offensively than we got from guys like Livingston, Iguodala, and other guys that were coming off the bench for us in recent years. Because, David West wasn't much of an offensive threat. Jonas Jerebko wasn't much of an offensive threat. Zaza Pachulia wasn't much of an offensive threat. We've had a lot of guys who played key playoff minutes who, weren't very good offensively. So we're very young and very inexperienced with the guys we have, but they can work, what better way to get better as an offensive player than having Steph and Draymond on the floor with you?
Very true. Raymond, I got a fun game I want to hear both your thoughts, but Ray, I want to start with you. let's go just way too early based on everything that's happened up to today. Top 4 teams. Rank the West 1 through 4. Who's the favorite down to the top 4 teams in the West right now?
I'd say Clippers, probably the top seed. And then it's probably this is tough. I think it's a toss-up between the Lakers on paper and Houston on paper, and then the Warriors at the 4th spot. And then 5. Well, you said top 4, right?
Yeah, top 4.
Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, top 4.
I think
top 4.
You wouldn't be wrong either way between the 2 and the 3, going between Houston and LA. Although, I think the Warriors are better than Houston, so I'm going to put Houston at 4, and then I'm going to give the Warriors the fight between 3 and 2. That's interchangeable with LA, just on paper now, because LeBron and AD is a pretty potent duo, defensively and offensively.
Oh, for sure. Okay, Candlestick Will, top 4 teams in the West.
Okay, so I did a power rankings a while back, way long ago when Kawhi and Paul George trades happened. Many moons ago from an NBA offseason perspective.
Oh yeah.
And when I did that, I'm trying to pull it up right now, but I'm pretty sure I had it Clippers, Warriors, Nuggets, Blazers as my top 4. And the Lakers hadn't made some of the moves that they've made since. And obviously the Rockets hadn't made this trade, so the Rockets are clearly a better team as well. Now I would say that it's be hard to put the Nuggets and Blazers still ahead of the Lakers and Rockets at this point now with some of the pieces added. I know Avery Bradley's not the same defender he used to be, but adding a player like that
was a good pickup. That was a good pickup
to what the Lakers have. And when I'm almost positive that when I made the rankings on Twitter, I don't think Cousins had signed with the Lakers yet either. And as much as I want Cousins to do well, I don't necessarily want him to do well for the Lakers. But the year he had with the Warriors and how much that the injuries he's had, derailed some of the things he was hoping to do. I am still pulling for that guy, and I'll forever be a JaVale McGee stan. So as long as he's out there, I'm still going to root for him. But there's some crazy decisions the Lakers are still making, bringing back Rondo and JaVale and some of the guys that they are, but they are so damn top heavy with 2 of the 5 best players in the world that it's really hard to not have them higher now with all the pieces they have. So I had Clippers, Warriors, Nuggets, Blazers, but I think I'm going to have to go with the same 4 teams now and go. And I'll still go with the Warriors too, but I think the Lakers are now 3 and the Rockets are now 4.
Interesting. So you guys are the same. I'm really torn. I have Clippers 1, Lakers 2. I'm really torn at the 3 and 4 seed. I'm just not sure. There's so many questions about this new look Warriors team and about the new look Rockets. I'm not really sure. I still think those are the 4 teams, the best 4 teams in the West. You definitely, those are some other great additions, and you're right. I really have a hard time putting Utah or Portland in that top 4 spot, in the top 4, just given everything and how much the top 4 teams we've mentioned, how much they've changed and how much they've done to try and improve in areas that they were really lacking. Having said that, I don't know where the Warriors, where they stand. That's where my choice is. I think you guys are a little bit higher on them. I'm not down on the Warriors. I'm more of I need to wait and see. I've got to see. I just have so many questions, and we're sitting here hypothesizing. They can go so many different ways. In Steve Kerr, we trust, and I definitely trust him 100%. But I'm just not sure where they land. Just depending on my mood throughout today, I was going, all right, does this put the Warriors at 3? Does it put the Rockets at 3? Does it put the Rockets at 4? Does it put the Warriors at 4? I don't fully know. So This is going to be interesting. I'm really curious, but that would be my ranking. So kind of like yours, Raymond. I'm a little muddled between. You were muddled between second and third. I'm muddled between third and fourth. I have the Warriors somewhere between the third spot and the fourth spot, and I think Clippers and Lakers. As much as I hate to put the Lakers on there, I talked about this on the last episode on Tuesday. I was like, oh God, I just can't stand the Lakers. They're just so obnoxious. Well, their fans are really the most obnoxious thing ever.
Yeah, if I'm being fair, I had just because AD and LeBron on paper, it's just it's just like how the Warriors have been the last 5 years.
I mean, that's a nasty squad. And as much as I was really kind of hoping they wouldn't do much. Danny Green was a great pickup. Avery Bradley, like you said, not the defender he was, but still a sneaky good pickup. Boogie Cousins, good pickup. They rounded out that team better than I expected them to. I was, with each new signing, I was like, damn, I'm getting annoyed by these signings. These are guys I don't want on that team. These are all guys I was hoping were going to get signed elsewhere. But I still think a Kawhi Leonard-led Clippers team is better. It's a deeper bench, better coach, better organization, and I just think they have the tools to knock off the Lakers. And I would love nothing more than to see LeBron lose. And I hope he never goes back to the finals. That's just a tangent, but I really do. I hope he never goes back. All right, gentlemen. Any final thoughts? Candlestick Will, any final thoughts before we sign off?
So I want to throw out a question to you guys. I mean, I teased the idea of like a Bradley Beal trade or a Kevin Love trade, but like, what's the next big domino? Like, if we assume that Chris Paul's going somewhere else, then like, what's the next? What would be your guess is like the next big player that's going to either be traded or demand a trade? Because I mean, that's the thing that's crazy. Like, I was looking at these numbers. 5 of the 10 All-Stars that started last year in the All-Star game are gone. Like, they're on different teams. Eight All-Stars from last year are on different teams. Like, it's insane, all this player movement. But then with the Paul George demanding a trade, and then because of that, Westbrook asking for a trade, Anthony Davis demanding a trade, like Kawhi Leonard, demanding a trade from the Spurs. Like, this league is just completely gone, batshit crazy. And one of the things I just saw on Twitter was that someone had posted the lineups of the 2017 All-Star game, and there's like 7 players that are still on their current teams, and 2 of those guys are John Wall and Kevin Love, and 3 of those guys are our guys, Steph, Clay, and Draymond.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and then most of these guys are moved twice. Like, Paul George was a Pacer then. And Millsap was on the Hawks, and DeAndre Jordan was a Clipper. It's like, DeMarcus Cousins was a King. Like, I mean, it's kind of funny when you look at these, and you're like, oh yeah, Kyrie Irving was on the Cavs. Like, I mean, as silly as that might sound, it's like, oh, Butler was on the Chicago Bulls. It's like this league is just insane. So like, what's the next domino to fall? Like, what would you guys say?
Ray, who do you think? I've got a couple, but I want to hear what you think, Ray.
I honestly don't know. I'm just not sure at this point. I think Chris Paul, we can kind of put him out of the equation because we know that that's a piece that's going to go somewhere. We just don't know where and if it'll happen. It really depends on what teams need, who needs him more. I think you hit the nail on the head. Putting the Heat out there, and Woj certainly confirmed that shortly after announcing after we got the Russell trade. So, I think I'm not sure what big name is left to move of who's available. I don't even know who's available at this point, because some guys are signed, but they might get moved anyways. No player is safe in the NBA. Unlike, baseball tends to move 1 or 2 big pieces a year. Football moves, a handful, less than a handful each season, but the NBA is like a dozen every season. So it's hard to nail it down. For me, I'm torn because I don't know. I think we're going to see a whole lot of, I think obviously role players are going to move and bench players, but I don't know who the next big name is that's going to drop. I feel like all the big names are done. I feel like this is the last one, and everything that comes after this is going to be like a former big name, like a Chris Paul or something like that. But as far as, active in their prime player movement goes, I think we saw the last of it today.
I thought that like 3 different times though. I'll say, I think Kevin Love, I've been thinking about him. I'm wondering, somebody's got to be sniffing around Cleveland. Someone's sniffing around Cleveland going, hey, what about Kevin Love? A team, not necessarily a player, but a team that I'm surprised hasn't been involved in a trade, and I think still may be primed for a trade, is the Toronto Raptors. Toronto Raptors have been very quiet for the most part, and they got a real sneaky GM over there, and I am, that is a team that I would not be surprised if they made a splash move. Maybe not even now, maybe in January or February, but I would say that the team to look out for, I think, is the Raptors, because they've just been so quiet. I would not be surprised if they did something, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin Love was one of the next big dominoes. What do you think, Candlestick Will?
Well, I think the Raptors, they've got like $90 million of expiring contracts with Lowry and Gasol and Ibaka and Van Vliet. So I wouldn't be surprised if some big move happened with them where they sent like Lowry and Ibaka to a team that was trying to, compete for a championship for, a couple first round picks and some, young pieces or whatever to have some better fits for Siakam. Someone like Van Vliet, essentially could be the guy that stays and Lowry's the one that goes after this season. So Van Vliet, Siakam-led team with some other pieces might end up being what they do in the future. But I could also see them just kind of riding the season out, enjoying the championship, giving themselves a year to breathe, and then letting all that cap space dissipate so that they can just go after whoever they want in the offseason, or just save it for the following season when Giannis and 20 other guys are going to be free agents.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking at the top, the top players in the league, and Karl Anthony Towns, may decide I don't want to be in Minnesota anymore, because that's what guys have always done. Is at some point, Kevin Garnett and Kevin Love and any other, Marbury, any other good players ever played in Minnesota finally gets tired of Minnesota. Andrew Wiggins is a great player, but he's not. He's getting paid an obscene amount of money for a guy who doesn't seem to want to get better. So, he might get moved because some coach thinks they can rehabilitate him. But, he's a guy who's certainly got talent that could end up being on the move. CJ McCollum, I know he loves it in Portland and Dame loves playing with him. But at some point, their GM might decide, we need to get a guy like Clay, next to our Steph versus having, a Monte Ellis who can, score at will but doesn't really have the defense to pair with Dame.
They've got one more year together, unless they like really just do awful. Then right. I can see them, moving on from. They'll move on from CJ. They obviously, Dame is the guy.
Well, the other guys I'm seeing on this list, whether it's this Devin Booker pulling a Eric Bledsoe and wanting to get out of Phoenix, Blake Griffin, maybe deciding, get me out of Detroit and take me somewhere else. DeMar DeRozan might decide he wants to go somewhere else other than San Antonio, although most guys tend to like San Antonio. Drew Holiday's not necessarily going to like a rebuild in New Orleans. So if they end up playing like a team with a bunch of rookies, then he might want out. And, so there's a lot of guys that could end up still being moved. But it'll be interesting, because those are the guys that I see. Andre Drummond, has a big contract and doesn't necessarily play to that contract, so he might want to go somewhere where he's paired with someone better. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of player movement, I think, still, as crazy as that sounds, considering all the people that have already moved. But yeah,
I definitely think Raptors need to do something, because they don't have any star power, so the chances of repeating are slim to none. Especially with especially how their competition has, kind of reloaded themselves.
Well, that GM certainly has, a lifetime pass by finally getting the championship, that if he decides to do nothing and let the fans just go to home games and cheer for their champions, I think they'll be fine with that. And if they let them all go in the off season, they'll be fine with that too. But he's also the guy that decided to, trade a fan favorite in DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard, which was
right.
one of the riskiest trades of all time, and now is going to go down as maybe the greatest trade ever. And so when you have that on your resume, you can't put it past them to want to do it again. And they had tried to package guys, to get Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to come to Toronto. So they were in those conversations, and at least thought about making those moves. And Kyle Lowry was almost traded at the trade deadline when they went out and got Marc Gasol, because they were trying to get Marc Gasol and Mike Conley. So it's not I don't think there's any reason to think that Kyle Lowry's definitely staying. I don't think him, Gasol, or Ibaka are for sure staying. I think all three of them are playing their last games in Toronto this year, one way or the other. So if all three of them are on expirings and not going to stay, then there's also no reason not to look into trading them.
Yeah, I agree.
100%. Go, Ray. Go for it.
No, that was pretty much it. Candlestick Will. You couldn't have said it better myself. You're making my job easier.
Well, that's what this is all about, right? Is trying to put a lid on all these topics so we can move on to the next, right?
Yes, we have a much more complicated sport on the horizon. With I know, Rudy, I know you mentioned earlier in the week Jimmy G's health is looking good, and of course we have the comparison between George Kittle and Gronkowski, which I can't think of a better comparison that Jimmy G made. So they both love wrestling. They're both eccentric. They're both extroverted and boisterous personalities. So I think George Kittle's definitely someone that could become the next Gronk. I just hope the injury part doesn't come with it.
Me too. And we'll definitely talk more about that on Sunday. So concludes another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis the First, baby.
And our esteemed co-host,
Candlestick Will.
Boom! We'll see you next time. Same GoldCast time, same GoldCast.
This is the GoldCast.